Dzień dobry, witam wszystkich. Dzisiaj w programie Gość Paferę rozmawiam z...
Hello, my name is Antonio Saravia and I am a professor of economics at Mercer University. I'm originally from Bolivia, but I live in Georgia, United States, where I teach at Mercer and direct the Center for the Study of Economics and Liberty.
Okay, and you have very interesting presentation about... It's not about economics, it's about how to study behavior, social behavior of societies, studying the red cards and yellow cards in football.
Yeah. So thank you very much for having me and asking about this paper. This is something that I did during the pandemic. I got this data from the Soccer Observatory in Zurich. That compiles 86 different national leagues according to the number of red and yellow cards that they issue or they book per match. Mm-hmm. So, and right on top, and this was astonishing to me because I'm from Bolivia, right on top was Bolivia. So Bolivia.
So the worst player, I mean
the roughest players seem to be in Bolivia because in average for the 2019-2020 season, in average per game in Bolivia they got 7.01 cards. That's combined red and yellow. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I thought, well, this is interesting. I mean, Bolivia seems to be these rough players play very, very aggressively. And then I started looking at the table, and I noticed that there were some Latin American countries right kind of on top. So, for example, we're today in Colombia. And Colombia is at 6.42 cards per game in average. And then you start going down the list, and you see the European countries, Italy, Spain, and so on. And down at the bottom, you have the USA with 3.7 cards per game, and you start going down and you see Norway with 2 cards per game, and then Japan, which was totally at the bottom, about 2 cards per game.
Okay, so Bolivia, that you saw your compatriots on the above of the scale, so it triggered your research.
It triggered my research. I thought perhaps there's something here. When I look at the countries and the ranking, seems to me that the countries that would think of, nice countries where I would like to live and develop companies and business and so on.
With polite people?
With polite people seem to be at the bottom, like Japan, like Norway, Iceland, and so on and so forth. Nice countries where people behave nicely. Yeah. And then on top of the list, you have countries in Latin America.
We should avoid it.
Which, they seem to be aggressive somehow,
but maybe they are more efficient.
You mean efficient in terms of?
Okay, so there is an expression that sport is it's a war, but without casualties.
Right.
So
right.
When you are playing the match, it's some kind of war, and you have to win.
Right.
Okay, so any method it's good provided you win.
Well, sure, but you're breaking the rules. That's why you're getting issued these cards.
Okay.
Right. So that to me was interesting, and I thought perhaps there is something here that we are reflecting in soccer what happens in society, and that triggered my research. And then I remember this guy, actually from Colombia. Your viewers may remember him, Francisco Pacho Maturana. He was the coach of the Colombian national team.
One of the famous one?
The famous one, because he took his national team, Colombia, to 2 consecutive World Cups. And to me this was fascinating because I remember Maturana in some of the interviews saying, look, you play the way you live.
So it was the expression you emphasized in your book.
Right, because he was referring more to kind of the personal behavior and discipline that players need to have in their personal lives. Like, for example, if you go party too much, if you go out at night, then you're not gonna produce good results when you go and play. Mm-hmm. So he was referring to that. He was kind of giving an advice to young footballers. You play the way you live. But to me, it seemed that he was actually saying a little bit more.
And can you say it in Spanish, this expression? Because I don't really understand. You play when
the way you live.
Yeah.
The way you live.
And how you say?
So in Spanish, that would be uno juega como vive.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you play according to the place.
The way you live.
Okay.
Not the place, but the way you like your life.
Okay.
Like if you have a disorganized life,
Yeah.
If
so
you drink
play...
too much, if you
Yeah.
go partying a lot, then
Yeah.
you're not going to play well.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
That's what he was trying to say. But to me, it sounded like he was probably more onto something more macro, which is maybe the way we organize a society gets reflected also in the way we play. So I started doing the research. I put some data together, indicators of aggressive behavior in society, which essentially boils down to social capital, and correlated that with the number of cards. And my results suggest that indeed, that countries in which we observe more aggressive behavior in general, meaning little respect for the law, the rule of law, and low levels of social trust, which would produce an aggressive society, are actually correlated with this ranking that I got. So for example, in Bolivia, nobody trusts anybody, right? Everybody's out there to cheat. To try to get on top of the.
Did you notice that this ranking is also according to the level of wellness of people?
And by wellness you mean?
So how much money they have?
Oh yeah. So that's one thing, right? So when you're trying to establish the correlation between one variable and another, you have to control for a series of factors that could also be affecting that relationship. And so I did. I have a set of probably about 10 or 12 control variables in my regressions. So I'm controlling for the level of income. I am controlling for the level of inequality in the country, because perhaps, if there is a lot of inequality, people will be angry, resentful, and that may be reflected on the way they play in the field. I also control for fractionalization, if there are ethnicities, if there is very heterogeneous society, so that could be reflected there. I control for the level of democracy, if there is democracy in the country, or perhaps it's a dictatorship and so on. I control for education, the levels of education in the country. I control for the macroeconomic stability or inflation. And then finally, I control for something that to me is very important, the quality of the league. I think you may like this.
Quality of the
league.
Of the players.
Of the soccer league.
Okay, because I thought that the quality of elite of the people who are ruling this country.
No.
Not yet.
No. So I'm controlling for all these social factors that could affect the way people play, right? Just to make sure that my relationship between aggressive society and aggressive soccer, is not driven by any of these factors. Okay. But one of those factors is the quality of the play. Yeah? Because look at this. So it may be that players have to behave aggressively because they don't have the quality or the skills. Like I substitute
the lack of skills
by playing rough.
Yeah.
And kicking the opponent, so to speak, right? So but if I have the skills, then I don't have to use that.
Yes.
But how do I know if a league has those skills versus another one, right? There is a ranking. I found this one. It's put together by an organization called Soccer. I think it's Soccer League Rank. You can find it on the web. And they rank the quality of the league according to different indicators. For example, how many TV viewers they get. So, arguably, if we all watch the Spanish league, it's because there is more quality than the Moldovan league.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Okay, so viewers. Also, how many players they export to other countries.
Yeah, it's a very good factor. Yeah.
Right. And the number of goals scored per game.
Yeah.
This is a factor of quality. And with all these measures, they produce a ranking of the best leagues according to this quality, So, my thinking was, if I'm looking, for example, at Bolivia, which is a very low quality league, right? Perhaps what they're doing is they're substituting lack of skills with roughness, and so I want to control for this quality thing, and that's something that no other paper has done. Like I'm contributing with this control variable, and so I put that in there, And even after putting that in there, plus all the other variables that I mentioned, plus another one which is a Latin factor, because I noticed that many of the countries on the top were actually from South America. And so I thought maybe this is a regional thing. Maybe we just grew up playing like this, right? So there is a regional factor. Well, I control for that regional factor. So even after controlling for all of that, I still get a negative and significant relationship between aggressiveness in society and aggressiveness in soccer, in play. And so essentially, right, so my conclusion is Pacho Maturana, this guy was right when he said you play the way you live.
I think that the coaches, you know, probably you heard that I founded the physics of life. And the foundation of the physics of life is a game theory. So the people who understand perfectly the game theory, you know, in practice, are coaches. Okay? So our Polish coach Kazimierz Górski, he also used to say a lot of very interesting things according to life. We have a splendid book of Garry Kasparov, Life Imitating Chess, and so on and so on. So I think that Pachurana, I think it's very good that he pushed you to make this research. So what are the conclusions? I mean, if I want to invest in some country, should I download the table from the Swiss website concerning red and yellow cards and then take this?
Well, there will be a lot more factors involved in that decision, but I think you make a good point. I think that would be one. My paper would suggest that if you look at the way soccer is played, you learn a lot about the society of that league, right? So I have a famous quote by Albert Camus at the beginning of my presentation. He said, everything important that I know about life, I learned it from soccer. And so I think this is interesting. This is a variable that people can easily look at and say, well, look, you know, these guys seem to be aggressive. There is this correlation. So perhaps, you know, I need to be a little bit extra careful if I'm going to invest in Bolivia, or I'm going to invest in Guatemala. I think it's number 2, Guatemala, in that ranking, or Colombia, 6.42, and so on. But if I'm thinking about investing in Norway or in Japan or in the US, you know, those guys seem to play nicely. If they play nicely in soccer, perhaps they play nicely also in life, and I'm not going to be cheated. Right. So that's kind of the message. At the end.
So you draw the conclusions on your speech about quality of life, and you gave the name. You named this. It's a social trust plus.
But rule of law.
Plus rule of law, but you gave the common name to this.
It's social capital.
Social capital.
That's right.
So its social capital is strictly correlated with the number of cards.
That's right. Negatively.
Negatively.
Yeah. So countries with less social capital will show more cards. Yeah. More aggressive behavior.
Okay. So this is according to the social sciences. And what can you say about economics? There is some kind of correlation with some economic factors?
Well, sure. So economics is about trade-offs, right? So economics is about if I do something, I'm going to give up something else, right? So if you think of countries with low social capital, right? So in which there is no respect for the rule of law and there is no social trust, right? Cuba could be one good example of this, right? Because nobody trusts anybody in Cuba. And everybody's trying to cheat, everybody's trying to steal, not because they are evil, but because they need to survive. Right? And so when I think of countries in which I have to resort to this kind of aggressive behavior in order to feed myself, in order to protect my family, right? Then immediately what I'm going to be thinking is, well, this is a very bad place to do business, right? Because my business is not going to flourish or be successful depending on my efforts or whether my product is good or not. It's going to be depending on how much I can cheat the system. And that therefore, you know, pushes away all kind of investment and good things happening, good reforms in the country. And therefore economically my country remains backward. Right. So it has a lot to do with the the way we develop as societies. Now, in terms of what people identify as typically economic indicators, for example, inflation or this kind of stuff, well, if we have a country with no investment because people don't want to come and invest because we cheat, because we don't trust, therefore we're not going to be able to generate income. Probably the governments are going to have to substitute that with spending. They're going to be growing big. Mm-hmm. And then we know, what will happen.
It also indicates that this kind of governance is bad, generally.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it kind of fits on itself, right? So we have bad governance, therefore people have to cheat in order to move forward, and because people have to cheat, no investment comes to the country, and because no investment comes to the country, the government has to supply all these other things by spending too much, generating deficits, and you have this...
Instead of improving social capital by education and explaining. By the way, so these results are very interesting and very simple to understand, I think. How do you, what do you intend to do to spread this message, to make it, to let those to the governors to let know about your research, they take it under consideration? Yeah,
well, this is the permanent dilemma that academics face, right? So we tend to have quote-unquote good ideas and good research, and we publish in these academic journals, and then nobody reads that. And I've been doing that all my life, publishing, and I got tenure, which is a great thing. But you're right; it's very difficult to make it to society, to politicians, to policymakers to read this stuff. And that's why, for example, I'm here. That's why I attend conferences. I travel around the world. I am engaged to speak. I do a lot of media requests. So if you Google me, you'll see that I've done a lot of interviews with...
So Google this, please. So here is your name. Okay. So I would like to ask you also to send me your presentation, if it's not secret or top secret.
Not at all.
And I will write an article and more. I work for one of the biggest and famous Polish internet televisions. It's an independent television, so okay, I cannot guarantee, but I can say that I will guarantee at least 10,000 views, okay, because this television is very, very popular, and I think it will be very hot topic, because it's interesting, just study how many cards in the league and how it reflects the behavior of the society.
A lot of people like soccer. And those are the comments. I saw your presentation. It said it was soccer, so I wanted to go and see what was going on. And so this paper it got published in one of the most respected journals. The Q1 are very difficult to land, so I'm very happy about it, and I hope I can keep presenting it around and talking to people. I think there is a lot to learn.
Okay, thank you very much for this very interesting interview. And I hope that your message will spread around the world, and especially governing, those in power, will draw conclusions.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.